I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio. So today we're talking about how to sew when you're feeling stressed out. We're going to cover why it's so hard to make time for things when we're stressed, how to make it easier to create when you're feeling this way, and some super practical tips and tricks for using sewing as a way to remove stress and not add to it. All right, so we're going to start with our icebreaker today. Do you have a tried and true sewing project for when you need a win? What do you think, Haley? Do you have one?
Probably. It changes from time to time. Like I don't have like one that I always have done and always will do. But really anything that doesn't require fitting, I think is usually one of the really like ingredients to make sure that you're like definitely going to feel successful. I've been into like hair accessories the last year. Our Drew headband is really fun to make. It uses the tiniest scraps and you can make it in like 30 minutes. And scrunchies, those have been my like go-to projects lately. But I do love a good tote bag. Like a simple lined tote bag always feels good.
Yeah. I made the Drew headband and scrunchies for holiday gifts last year, and they're just so fun to sew. And I love making anything that you can use scraps for. It just makes me feel so good to use up those leftover pieces of fabric that I have laying around and that I always hold on to longer than I should.
Yeah, and it like makes the win feel like even more successful when you're like making something that's cute and you like it's quick, you're using scraps. For things like that, you usually use like more fun fabrics. So it like really like brings layers of enjoyment to a project, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, when I need a win, I really like making things for my home. They're so fast and easy. Again, you don't have to worry about fitting and you get to use them or see them all the time. So things like pillows or dish towels, cute little tea towels. I bake a lot of bread, so I'm always using tea towels for baking bread. Those things, you can use fun fabrics, just like you said, and you can use scraps. Those are probably my favorite quick wins. But I also like making little bags and pouches and things like that. I've been thinking I need to do a little bit more of that lately. It would be really nice to get in some of those really fun, quick sewing projects, I think.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a win. Everybody needs a quick win in their back pocket.
For sure.
So if you have an icebreaker that you want to share with us, we'll use it on a future episode. If you're a member, you just go to seamwork.com/go/icebreakers. And if you go there, it'll redirect you to the thread we have on the community where you can share an idea for an icebreaker, and we'll probably use it in a future episode. We always pick from them when we're choosing icebreakers for our episodes. So thank you to everybody else who's already contributed one as well. So today we want to talk about stress. And I feel like sometimes when I'm stressed, not even sometimes, I would say most of the time when I'm stressed, that's when I'm the least likely to do things that will help me to de-stress. And I was thinking about this, and I think a lot of the reason for that is that a lot of my stress, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, a lot of my stress comes from constraints on my time, just being very busy or very overwhelmed. And so because of that, when you're feeling really, really busy or you're feeling overwhelmed, then it can feel impossible to make more time for yourself, even though that's exactly what you need at that moment. So it's sort of a conundrum. And I think for me, what's been the most helpful is just having some really kind of processes set in place beforehand when I'm not in that mindset, when I'm not feeling terrible, so that I can turn to them in that moment. I can recognize, aha, I'm feeling really stressed out. Here's what I said I would do when I'm feeling stressed out. So we wanted to give you some tips around that today because Haley and I are both in a very, very busy time right now. We're both super busy at work. We've been working really hard on this big new project that we're going to be sharing with you soon. And I think we're both feeling a little bit fatigued and excited, but it's challenging. We're very challenged right now. And I think probably, I can't speak for you, Haley, but for me, it's been really vital to have some practices that I can turn to when I feel this way, because everybody feels stress from time to time. And the real challenge is how you deal with it again and again, because it's always going to come up again. So I was thinking, we were talking about this earlier, and I was thinking about, I've had a lot of time pressure this year from probably since January. I've just been kind of in go, go, go mode. And I hadn't been doing a lot of things for myself and hadn't been doing a lot of sewing. But I finally sat down and made a dress a little while back. And once I did, I really enjoyed the whole process. And I remembered how much joy sewing gives me and how much it helps me to relax and enjoy just the process of making something with my hands. So, what about you, Haley? Are there times when you felt that way, like you were under a lot of pressure or stress and having trouble making time for things like this?
Yes, definitely. There's lots of times I can think of, but one that stands out to me is a couple of years ago when Charlie, my daughter, was just maybe like 5 months old. It was my first Mother's Day. And like to give you like a little, set the stage a little, this was like very early COVID pandemic lockdown kind of time. I had returned to work, but my husband had gotten laid off. And it was just this like really stressful, chaotic time, because having an infant that young is really stressful and chaotic, but also the world was upside down for me like it was for everyone else. And it was Mother's Day, and Eric, my husband, was like, Haley, I want to take Charlie all day. I'm going to take care of her. I want you to like do your own thing all day long, which I was really grateful for. But I was like, all I wanted to do was just like curl up in a ball and sleep for 14 hours, which honestly probably would have been a really great use of my time. But I was like, no, I didn't want to feel like I was wasting my time. And like I was going to have like FOMO, I guess. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to like go into my sewing room, which I hadn't sewn anything for a while. And I'm going to make something. And I like dug through my fabric, and I found quints already printed out and cut out, and I found some fabric I could make it with. And so I just spent the better half of that day just slowly, not rushing, sewing the quints pattern. I made like a little robe for myself because I was at home all the time. I'm like, I'm gonna wear this all the freaking time. I made it in this fabric that one of my favorite fabrics that I love so much. And when I was done, I just felt so, I guess the word is refreshed, and also like proud of myself for like taking time for myself to do something nice like that. A nap probably would have been advisable as well. I wish someone would have like hit me over the head and been like, girl, go take a nap. But I still wear that robe all the time, probably every single day. And it's like a little self-care reminder for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that we'll talk about this a little bit later, but just that decision about what do I need right now at this moment? Do I need just more sleep? Do I need to just do nothing for a little while and just decompress and not do anything? Or do I need to do something that's going to make me feel connected to myself, or going to make me feel just creative? Or what is it that I need at that moment? That can be the first point, is just deciding, what you need, which I think it's a decision, it's like sometimes you really do need to just do nothing.
Yeah. And I think in that moment, I probably needed, and I recognized this on some level, like I needed to feel like a little bit in control of something. Everything was so like circumstances so out of my control, and being able to like press pause on the world and close the door to my sewing space and be behind the wheels for a little bit felt really great. Also, when you have like a young kid, like infant like that, you can't like finish any task from start to finish. It was like the most frustrating thing of becoming a new parent for me is you can't even like unload the dishwasher. Mm-hmm. Like from start to finish, it can be a project that takes you all day. And so it felt really good to have a sense of completion. Mm-hmm. And I think that lots of people, like, it's not just like new parents who feel that way. There's lots of times in my life I've felt that way, and I'm sure other people can relate.
Yeah. What are some other things that help you to de-stress when you're feeling stressed out?
I think it's like always going on a walk and getting outside if the weather allows is like my number one. I think, like we're just like we can be like, treat yourself like a complicated like house plant, like water yourself, go drink a glass of water, go get some sunlight. Just, I guess, getting in touch with things that bring me joy in general, whether that's like creative project or physical movement or something like that. What about you?
I love going for walks. I should probably do that more, especially now it's getting warmer. I think for me, it comes back to what we kind of just talked about, which is figuring out what I need at that moment. And sometimes it's a nice hot bath and reading a book and just lounging for a little while. And sometimes it's doing something like cooking some food or baking a cake or sewing something, or it just depends on what my needs are at that moment. And I feel like it's really important to find what the right balance is for you and for that particular point in time. I do think it's really important to not use your creative hobbies as another way to put pressure on yourself to do more and more and more and feel like, oh, this is something I have to do. This is something that I told myself I would do, whatever story you're telling yourself about it. I fall into that trap all the time still. And it's something I really try to keep an eye out for because it can be difficult. I think when you're a creative person, it can be difficult not to transform whatever you're doing, whatever you're creating into just another way to be productive and another way to get stuff done or to fulfill some kind of promise you made to yourself. That's kind of how I feel about it. At least in my head. I think in practical terms, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes I still end up putting pressure on myself and feeling terrible about things. And that's something I've struggled with lately, which I'll talk about a little bit more when we get to our tips today. Things that I've kind of uncovered through the last few months.
Yeah, I think that it can be hard to kick yourself like into gear to start a creative project when you're stressed out, particularly stressed for time, because creative projects oftentimes are a big time commitment. And so it just feels like you said, one more thing on your to-do list. Something that I always try and work on is kind of like lowering my point of entry for a project. And I'll do this by breaking things into little bits, like clearing my sewing space beforehand or prepping all of my notions or pre-washing my fabric, things like that. But are there any ways that you lower your point of entry to make it easier to like get started when you're struggling to just get started?
Yeah, there are a few things. And this applies to sewing or any kind of creative thing, but also these are things that I do at work as well. I think if I'm struggling to get started on something, like you said, I think just kind of clearing the decks and making sure that you're prepared for it all, have everything in place, that makes it a lot easier. I think another thing that is helpful for me is just having maybe a set time to do the work in, so you feel like it's at least bounded in some way. And if you're feeling stressed for time, that can be really helpful because you have a certain amount of time you said you would dedicate to this. And, depending on what it is and depending on how you're feeling at the moment, it's not something I would advise in every situation, but sometimes it can be nice to just tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to give myself half an hour. I'm just going to give myself an hour and see what I can get done. There's no pressure to finish any particular part of this project or to get the whole thing done. It's just, I'm just going to enjoy doing this for this amount of time. And that's always something that's been helpful to me. And I use it at work too. I'm very fond of the Pomodoro method. If anybody's heard of that, you set basically a timer for a certain amount of time. I think traditionally it's like 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break or something like that. That's helpful for me and just kind of kicking myself into gear, making sure that I feel like, okay, I'm getting started now. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to do this for a certain amount of time and just enjoy it. So those are the things that help me. What about you? Is there anything besides like getting your space cleared that you feel like helps you to prepare?
I think that definitely like clearing my space and like also kind of like setting the stage for like a enjoyable environment is definitely something that I do. I'll like open up the windows nice and wide, and I'll do little things like trick myself. Like I'm just going to go tidy up my sewing desk. And then sometimes it kind of like snowballs from there. So I'll like do little like mind tricks like that. Like I only have to sew one seam. And most of the time you end up wanting to do more than that. Like, yeah, brain trickery is helpful for me.
Yeah. You hear that a lot about people with working out, that you just have to get your shoes on and tell yourself you're going to do it for 5 minutes. And then it ends up feeling good and you end up doing it for an hour.
Totally similar. Why do you think that creative activities help us to de-stress?
Well, I think for me, a big thing is shifting of gears and shifting of ways of thinking. I think a lot of times we're kind of stuck in this very left brain mode of always doing, always trying to be productive, get a certain amount of stuff done, satisfy other people. We kind of put ourselves into this almost machine-like mode a lot of the time, especially at work, I think. And being able to shift into that right brain mode where you're feeling a little bit more open, a little bit more available, a little bit more, you notice things a lot more, you're paying attention a lot more, you're using your body a little bit more. I think that completely changes the way that you're experiencing life in that moment. And having that practice of doing that, of going back to that mode of thinking over and over again, there's lots of ways to do that. I think creative activities, whether it's sewing or drawing or whatever it is, are one way to do that. There's lots of other ways to do that. But I think the more you can kind of shift your brain into that way of thinking, the more practice you have at that, I just think the happier you're going to be, because I think that's a place that we humans don't spend enough time. And that's mostly because our society has kind of trained us that the left brain side of things is more important. And that's not necessarily true. That's my own philosophy on it. Mm-hmm. Do you find that they help you de-stress? Do you feel like less stressed when you are doing something creative like sewing?
I think it really like goes back to what we were talking about earlier of like, it helps me de-stress if that's what I need in that moment. If I need to switch gears, then yes. But if really what I need to do is rest, then I feel like I'm just like fighting an uphill battle the whole time. So I think it really depends. I also have lots of different creative hobbies. So it's taken some like practice to recognize which one is going to feel best to me in that moment. I think that sewing can be, depending on the kind of sewing you're doing, can be a little bit physically taxing. So if I'm like feeling like my body needs to rest and my mind needs to work through a puzzle of sorts, then I'll choose something different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I feel like most of my hobbies that help me de-stress are very physically taxing. So that's a good point. Things like gardening is extremely physically taxing for me.
Yeah, a lot of mine are, which is why I've recently picked up painting, because it's just like a little bit more static. Mm-hmm. The kind of painting I'm doing anyway.
Yeah. It's a great segue to our first tip, which is to begin with, just decide if you're feeling like you're in a high energy state or a low energy state. So are you feeling like you just need rest? You just need to calm your nervous system. You need to relax, do nothing for a little while. Then maybe you're in more of a low energy state and maybe doing nothing is the answer. Or are you feeling maybe moderate to high energy, like you can physically move a little bit, you want to physically move, you kind of want to work those things out. I think movement is a really, really great way to removes stress on a physiological level. So if you are feeling that, I think maybe that's the way to go, and just kind of asking yourself that question. We've talked about this already, but I think it is really important to spend time not doing anything productive, that you give yourself time to do nothing. I was telling Haley earlier, I bought this book that I used to have years and years ago. It's a small kind of gifty book that is a series of essays and photographs by this writer named Véronique Vian, and she's was an art director. And she also wrote this series of books, and one of them is called The Art of Doing Nothing. And I used to have this book, and I just found it really soothing. So I saw it on Amazon, a used copy on Amazon, and I just bought a copy of it, and I was reading it in the bathtub the other day, and it was very soothing, and it gives you a lot of ideas for how to spend time just doing nothing and not feel guilty about it. So we'll put a link to that book in the show notes. Maybe you can find a copy, and maybe a used copy on Amazon or at your library too. It's a really sweet book. So if you are feeling low energy, don't feel bad about spending time doing nothing. I think it's vital to our well-being to do that. And I also think it's important not to have guilt about not being productive. That can be a big source of stress in and of itself. So that's the first tip. The second one is, if you are feeling kind of in that moderate zone, like maybe you do want to do something, but maybe you don't have a ton of energy, make a low energy sewing menu for yourself. So Haley and I were talking about this, and we both really like the idea of having kind of menus for various things, especially around self-care, things that you can do for yourself, just because, like we talked about earlier, it can be so difficult to make those healthy choices when you're in the middle of feeling terrible. And so if you can make it easy for yourself to make those healthy choices, then do it. And I think one way to do that is just to have some little lists, some little menus of things that you could do that are going to make you feel better and that are going to be easy to do. So the idea here is to create a list of things that you could do that are sewing related, that don't take a ton of energy. Maybe they don't take a ton of time. Maybe it's projects like what we talked about before, making things for your house or making scrunchies or anything that is just going to give you that sense of well-being without requiring a lot from you if you don't have a lot to give. So I think that's a really fantastic idea, and it can really I'm just all about making it easy for yourself when you're in a bad place. Anything you can do to kind of have a trigger and then have a way to respond to that trigger, I think can be really, really helpful. So my next tip is one that I have really started to kind of come to terms with in the last few months, and that tip is to throw out your to-do list. So for me, I am a list maker. I love making lists. I think this all started many years ago when I first read the book Getting Things Done by David Allen, which my husband Ken recommended to me. And that was the first productivity book I'd ever read, because I was like, I am not a productivity person. This is not going to be for me. And then I read it and I was like, yes, this is going to make my life easier. And it did. It has made my life much, much easier in a lot of ways, but it's also made me very reliant on having systems in place for doing things. And to-do lists for me are one of those systems. And I've just found lately that they have been really sucking the joy out of everything in my life. So I am still all about lists and having everything written down and documented and in a system when it comes to big projects, like work projects, things like that. But I was finding myself just making lists on the weekends. I would have a list on the counter, and it would include all of these things I felt like I had to do. And a lot of them were things that I really enjoy doing. But once I put them on a list, they just became like a to-do item and something that I told myself that I was going to get done that day. And then it totally transformed the way I related to it. And so, I love cooking, for example, but I would make banana bread on my list. And then all of a sudden it was like, I just have to do this so I can check it off and move on to the next thing, because I only have a certain number of hours in the day and I have so many things on my list. How am I going to get this all done? So I would say one of the things that I've really had to come to terms with is like, not everything needs to be on a list. Maybe you'll forget some of it. Who cares? when it comes to things that are just supposed to be things that you enjoy or that are, going to bring you a sense of peace in your life, like don't, you don't have to worry about it that much, or at least I don't. So if you're a recovering list maker like myself, it's funny, I don't even consider myself like a type A person at all. Like I consider myself very much not, but it's like I've learned to be a type A person over the years, which is really, really interesting. And I've had to let some of that go.
Yeah, I think that also throwing out the to-do list, which is something that I'm also very guilty of, is making a list for everything, has helped me to like live more in like the moment and also be more in tune with what I need in that moment, whether making banana bread sounds good or going on a walk, or really like being more in tune with your specific needs in that moment, not on Friday night when you frantically jotted down that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that experience of time and like understanding what you need when you close to the time that you're going to be experiencing it is so important. And I think that's been something that I've been missing a lot of the time lately. So I think it's just like a really good life lesson for me. And hopefully it's helpful for some of you too. The next tip that I have is if you're using a creative activity like sewing as a way to de-stress, I find it really helpful to create a positive experience around it altogether. So maybe that means for you like closing the doors of your sewing room, putting on some music that you really love, pouring yourself some of your favorite tea or maybe a glass of wine, if you're not too worried about spilling it. Whatever really helps you to just relax and create a really positive feeling around the entire experience of sewing, I think that makes a huge difference. If I feel like I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to step into my sewing room and do this for a little while, and then I'm going to go back to whatever else I was doing, it just doesn't have the same calming effect as if I make it into more of a ritual. I think that's something that's been really, really helpful to me as well. Do you have things that you do, Haley, that help you to make sewing feel like a break or moment of serenity?
Something that I kind of like recognize what I kind of need in that moment. If I'm more in the like tea and gentle music and all the windows drawn open really wide. And sometimes I want to like pour a glass of wine and have reality TV on in the background when I'm sewing. It's something to like distract my, I don't know, like lizard brain, something just totally like, I don't know, chaotic that takes me out of like my inner monologue.
Yeah.
Can kind of be helpful while I keep my hands busy. But I definitely love like watching some reality TV sometimes when I'm sewing. I think that it's fun. And also it's just like, yeah, I think it helps me to like take my brain out of a loop if that's kind of the problem that I'm struggling with in that moment.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way too. I feel like I listen to podcasts a lot while I'm sewing, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners do too. If you listen to this one, you're probably a podcast person. So I find that really soothing because the kinds of podcasts I listen to are often, not always, but they're often more like storytelling type podcasts. And so it kind of just takes me out of my world for a little bit. And I think, I don't know, stories can really have a way of, they do something different to your brain and kind of help you to, I don't know, connect to other people, or there's just like this, I don't want to say distraction, but it almost is like just a different world that you get to inhabit for a little bit. So I don't know, that can be really soothing. Yeah, it's a break. I feel like that's one of the ways, whether it's reality TV or a podcast or whatever it is, that you can like lower the bar for yourself in a way and just say, well, have this like, I'm going to just totally take a break from my world and go into this other world for a little while. And just that in itself is something that can make it feel more approachable, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a little vacation. I did that for a while with them. When I'd go to like when I was at the gym and I like never want to do cardio at the gym. I just want to like do something fun and like lift heavy things instead. So I like have to like bribe myself to do cardio. And I would watch Game of Thrones. This was back when Game of Thrones was like happening still. And I would watch that on like the treadmill or the elliptical or the Stairmaster. And then I was like, man, someone's going to look over my shoulders and be like, what is going on over there? Someone's getting like beheaded or something. Yeah, something spicy is happening. So I'd have to like pick the machine that I was on like strategically, like make sure there isn't like an audience behind me.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that too because I'm not like a cardio person either. And we got a treadmill because I feel like I barely walk anymore since the pandemic started. So we got a treadmill for the colder winter months. And I watch YouTube videos on it like every day. I just like choose some silly YouTube video, usually like just some like funny videos. And I watch them while I walk. It's super relaxing. Like it's just like completely takes me out of anything else that's going on. It just makes me laugh. I think maybe that's another tip. Laughter is a really good way to de-stress. So maybe a funny podcast is what you need.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Our surprise tip number 5, laugh.
Yeah, and watch like ridiculous YouTube videos.
I'm a fan. I like it. All right. Well, we covered a lot of ground today. I'm going to do a little recap. So we offered 4 tips to you for sewing when you feel stressed. Tip number 1 is to decide whether you're feeling high or low energy and try and match your activity to what you're feeling in that moment. Tip 2 is to make a low energy sewing menu for yourself. It can be a lot easier to choose something creative when the decision is kind of like made for you in a way. You only have to choose from a multiple choice menu of items. So you can create your own sewing menu. You can make one for low energy, high energy. You can make menus for other parts of your life. It's something that I've started practicing and really helps me. Tip number 3 is to throw out that to-do list. Making to-do list for, the fun stuff can suck out the joy. So if that's something that's happening in your life, throw it out, burn it in the fire, get rid of it. And tip number 4 is to try and create a positive experience around your sewing or your creative practice. Make a pot of tea, pour a glass of wine, put some music on, put some Real Housewives on, whatever like floats your boat. So those are the tips that we have for you today. If you want to learn more about these kinds of things or explore a little bit more, our last episode was about 3 steps for helping you get past sewing mistakes or failure. So if your stress is surrounding making a mistake, then maybe check out that episode. You might find it helpful. And in our next episode next week, we're going to cover some creative exercises you can do when you only have 10 minutes. So if you're feeling really stressed for time, definitely listen to that episode for some ideas. One really good low energy sewing activity is to just make some future sewing plans. That is where our free sewing planner comes in. It's a printable tool that you can use to help you design and plan your sewing projects. It includes pages for sketching your looks, planning your individual projects with sketches, swatches, all of that fun stuff. And then you can print as many pages as you want. And best of all, it is available for free. You can check it out at seamwork.com/go/free-planner. So that is seamwork.com/go/free-planner. And if you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you could leave us a review. We read every single one of them and they mean so much to us. Here is a review from Gracie Lou. She says, I've been popping on this delightful podcast while sewing lately, and it feels like I'm sewing with friends. Aww. Although I've been sewing since I was 11, I'm now 41. I've learned so many good tips and tricks from these talented ladies. They're always coming in clutch with encouragement and motivation to keep on making cool stuff. Also, Seamwork, the site, is legit. Aw, thanks, Gracie Lou. Thanks. I think it's legit, too.
Yeah, it's legit.
Totally legit. Yeah. And this California girl really appreciates the choice of words there. So good. So if you leave us a review, we might read it on a future episode like we did with this one. If you're stressed for time, you can just like us or subscribe. Click that button, and that helps us out too. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. That is the name of our channel, Seamwork Video. Follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork, which is legit, and become a part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, podcast listeners get 50% off with a lifetime, that is a forever discount when you join. And you can join and get that discount at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50.
All right.
And that is all that we have for you today.
If you're feeling stressed, I hope you feel better. Be nice to yourself.
Me too.
And we'll see you next week. I'm Sarai.
I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.